As always, Masha tells his stories and welcomes you to the 22nd episode of the podcast Film Grazie Artis, or just Film of shortly. Here I share tales that inspire and reveal unique experiences of creators, makers and lovers of all kinds. I hope you find this program interesting, whether you practice art or enjoy learning about the way to mend what is torn, be it fabric in your hands or a tender piece of the soul. Today, when you sit down with a needle and thread, it isn't about mending a shirt or anything else. It's like immersing yourself in something greater, like taking part in a conversation that has lasted for centuries. Your stitches sometimes a little uneven, but you like to think they move in rhythm with all the hands that came before yours. Mending and darning has never been merely practical. It has always been about care, resourcefulness, and the stories our clothes hold. Across the world and throughout history, people have repaired garments in ways that reveal both necessity and beauty. To mend is an attempt to understand how and why something was broken, torn away, ravaged, worn thin, or rubbed out. It's a careful act of attention, looking closely at damage, tracing its causes, and recognizing its history. Only then can it be remade, rewoven, re-understood, and ultimately reimagined anew. The philosophical significance of mending textiles reaches far beyond practicality. Across cultures and centuries, the act of repair has carried deep meanings about time, identity, care, resilience, and our relationship with material things. Mending interrupts the illusion of permanence. Cloth wears out, bodies age, materials fail. To mend is to acknowledge time rather than deny it. In traditions such as Japanese boro and sashiko stitching, patches are not hidden but layered, making time visible on cloth. The garment becomes an archive of use. Philosophically, this challenges the modern desire for the new and flawless. Mending suggests that the value can accumulate through wear. It aligns with ideas or impermanence formed in Japanese aesthetics, often associated with wabi-sabi. Beauty resides in transience and incompleteness. Historically, mending was often carried out in domestic, frequently feminized spaces. It was undervalued labor, yet essential. From a philosophical perspective, this places mending within an aesthetic of care. To mend is to extend the life of what sustains us, resist waste, practice attentiveness and responsibility. In this sense, repair becomes moral action. It reflects stewardship rather than consumption, a quiet refusal of disposability. By the way, clothing is intimate. It rests against the body. When it is repaired, the repair binds memory into fabric. A patched sleeve might recall labor, migration, poverty, love, survival. Mended textiles often carry personal history, family lineage, and collective memory. This suggests that identity is not seamless but patched, constructed from experience, damage, and adaptation. The self, like cloth, is something that can be rewoven rather than replaced. Thus, some might ask, isn't mending just a simple act of restoration? Actually, repair is not simple restoration, it's transformation. A tear changes the cloth, a patch changes its structure. The object after mending is not identical to its previous state. This resonates with broader philosophical questions. Can brokenness be integrated rather than erased? Is healing a return or becoming? Mending proposes that damage does not negate value. Instead, it can create new forms of strength where the patch represents both a scar and a reinforcement. To erase damage is to pretend it never happened, but cloth remembers stress in its fibers, bodies remember injury, people remember loss. Attempts at total restoration aim for invisibility, for a return to seamlessness. Yet, seamlessness can be a fiction. Integration does something different. It acknowledges the tear, it reinforces it, it may even highlight it. In visible mending traditions, the repair is not camouflage, but conversation. The break becomes part of the structure. A scar does not negate the body, it marks survival. In this sense, brokenness, integrated, becomes depth rather than defect. Healing is rarely a simple return. A torn textile once mended is not the same cloth as it was before. The weave is altered, tension redistributes. Strength may even increase in certain areas. The repaired garment enters a new phase of existence. Likewise, healing in human life often involves reinterpretation of what happened, reorganization of meaning, a shift in perspective or capacity. A return implies restoration of a prior state, as if time could be reversed. Becoming recognized that time moves forward, healing then is not going back, but going on differently. It is a transformation that incorporates what occurred rather than subtracting it. Together, these questions suggest brokenness, integrated, becomes part of form. Healing, therefore, is not the recovery of what was, but the creation of what can now be. In Mending Cloth and in Mending Lives, repair is not about restoring innocence, it's about constructing a new coherence, one that includes the tear. In contemporary society, fast fashion promotes rapid disposal. Mending becomes a quiet act of resistance, a slowing down. To mend is to re-enter the relationship with material reality, to restore intimacy between person and object. Throughout history, textile repair has served as a metaphor, which is about repairing social bonds, weaving communities, stitching together fractured histories. The language of mending appears in political and spiritual thought alike, mending the fabric of society. Cloth becomes a model of understanding interdependence. Threads gain strength through connection. While in essence, the philosophical significance of mending textiles lies in its quiet insistence that imperfection is not failure, care is creative, time deepens meaning, repair is transformation, not erasure, continuity is built through attention. To mend is to enter into dialogue with damage and to choose continuity over abandonment. The philosophy of care, interaction and becoming extends beyond textiles and the domestic sense. It resonates with the ways people and societies respond to larger forms of damage, the fractures caused by war, displacement, violence and systematic injustice. Artists around the world have taken up needle, thread, and fabric to explore these global wounds, using mending and textile practices as a form of testimony, activism, and collective memory. Their work demonstrates how the same principles that guide the repair of cloth, attention, care, and transformation, can be applied to the repair of social and emotional fabrics. Such an emotional cloth is bullet cloth. It's a long-running series of textile works by Japanese-born artist Seiko Atsura Purdue, who works with fiber, fabric, and installation to explore material and conceptual oppositions. In this series, she adapts traditional textile processes, especially shibori, a Japanese resist dyeing technique, by substituting unexpected materials instead of tying fabric with thread and using beans. She uses wax instead of thread and bullet as the resist object. The bullet, as she explains, carries a powerful contradiction. Traditionally, it's an instrument that destroys, yet physically it has beautiful form and surface. This juxtaposition, destruction vs beauty, violence vs creation, is central to bullet cloth. By inserting a violent object into a craft associated with calm, repetition, and aesthetic process, the work makes visible the tension between opposition forces in human experience and global realities. Though not explicitly a piece about war in the documentary sense, bullet cloth engages deeply with themes that resonates with contemporary concerns about violence, power, and transformation. A bullet is normally associated with harm and conflict. Repurposing it in textile making highlights a shift from destructive to constructive intent. The bullet's presence draws the viewer's attention to how form, beauty, shape, and meaning, that is about violence, threat, can be integrated in material culture. By anchoring these contradictions in traditional crafts such as shibori, Purdue also evokes historical continuity, craft labor, and the body's imprint in textile. In other words, bullet cloth literally embeds the mark of conflict into a textile surface, inviting viewers to consider how objects and symbols associated with harm might be transformed with artistic and philosophical processes, much like the larger questions of how societies can engage with global damage, memory, and recovery. Seika Tsurapurdu commented on her work with the following statement: "After every war, we mend and heal little by little, even as we participate in new acts of killing across the world. Reflecting on contemporary conflicts such as in Iraq, I cannot help but think of the tragic history in my own country, particularly the bombing of Hiroshima during the Second World War." One more example belongs to British artist Ruth Sinner. In her deeply personal work, Lost Love, made from an unfinished vintage embroidery that she reworked by hand, she creates a simple memorial to a dear friend and lover who died suddenly at a very young age. Sinner reflects on the incompleteness of both the textile and the life it commemorates. Unfinished cloth becomes a visual metaphor for unfinished lives, unanswered questions, and stories left untold. We can highlight a series of aspects in Sinner's work. The first is memory and loss. By using an existing but unfinished embroidery, Sinner connects the physical incompleteness of the work with emotional loss. The stitches she adds are acts of remembering, while the unstitched areas evoke absence and unresolved grief. The second is material and narrative. Sinner often works with found and vintage textiles, allowing the history and trace of previous human use to inform their pieces. In Lost Love, the aged fabric itself carries the silent stories, much like memories of the person she loved. The third is the process. The act of stitching becomes both a meditative and emotional practice. Each thread, each small decision about where to stitch and where not to stitch is part of the narrative, intertwining Sinner's personal history with the material story of the cloth. At the same time, Lost Love has connection to more broader themes. Lost Love sits within Sinner's wider interest in how textile perspective reveal and transform emotional experience. Many of her works, whether memorial samples, quilts, or pieces referencing personal and collective memory, explore how cloth can embody stories of attachment, absence, and human connection. In this way, Lost Love doesn't just represent a personal loss, it gestures toward universal experiences of grief and the impossibility of fully completing the narratives of those we have lost. The textile becomes a container of memory where care and mourning are woven together through the slow, deliberate act of stitching. Mending and weaving in a global way can also serve as specific research that bridges textile, sculpture, and social injustice. One of the examples is Savannas for the Forgotten by Lily Martina Lee, where she reflects on how material practice can create forms of memorialization and evidence, extending craft into realms of remembrance, loss, and justice. She explores how unsolved crimes and forgotten lives shape cultural imagination, identity, and landscape. Using processes such as hand weaving, hand dyeing, metalwork, and mixed media. One of the Lee's most discussed bodies of work is titled The Great Basin Murders, a series of hand-woven shroud-like textiles that memorialize unidentified victims of homicides discovered along highways in the American West. These pieces are not decorative, but structurally informed by data, such as height, age, and GPS coordinates, so that the density and the form of the weave encode elements of each victim's case, creating a textile archive of absence and violence. Rather than representing the victims in a literal figurative way, Lee's woven shrouds operate as devotional acts of craft and remembrance, bringing attention to lives that the official systems have marginalized or overlooked. The austere visual language reflects both the silence surrounding the cold cases and the emotional weight of forgotten lives. This situates her work at a powerful intersection, textile as testimony and material remembering as a corrective to cultural forgetfulness. The textile effectively becomes cultural memorials to bodies that might otherwise remain without identity or narrative, addressing the ethical urgency of remembering amid social silence. To sum up, I feel it necessary to mention the quote by Claire Hunter from the book Threads of Life, A History of the World Through the Eye of a Needle, that states, "Sewing is a way to mark our existence on cloth, patterning our place in the world, voicing our identity, sharing something of ourselves with others, and leaving the evidence of our presence in stitches held fast by our touch." In this sense, each stitch marks a trace on fabric, making whole again that was torn and worn. It mends the scars of existence, serving as a memorial of memory. Whether you are the one who mends or the one who commemorates, I wish you to embrace the breaks and let the most beautiful flowers grow from the wounds, allowing the beauty to bloom from the scars and the threads that hold the damage together. And I will be back soon.